Professor Michael Clarke joins me now. So why have the Ukrainians put this out there now?
Well, we've all known that these drones existed. There's a bit of footage of them, and we weren't really sure what their capabilities were. They're now boasting about it because they're saying, look, these are home-produced entirely. It's our own technologies, and they've got 3 big hits that they can celebrate. They've tried a few attacks on Sevastopol, which were partially successful, but they've hit the Kerch Bridge on the 17th of July, and they say, yes, it was us, the first time they acknowledged it. They hit an oil tanker and badly damaged it, and they hit a landing support ship, quite a big ship. Interestingly, at Novorossiya harbour, which is the Russian naval base. So these things are new technologies. They're probably made of fiberglass, mainly. They are only a few metres long. They carry about 570 kilos of explosives, almost 3/4 of a tonne. So they're pretty potent, and the Ukrainians now want the rest of the world to know about it because they think they can really worry the Russians with these things. What's most interesting to me about these is not that they exist, but the range we're talking about. The nearest place they could launch them from on the Ukrainian coast is around Mykolaiv and Odessa, because they don't control any of the rest of the coast. And Novorossiysk, which is the Russian naval base, is about 750 kilometres away. So 400 miles. I mean, you're saying that a very small robotic boat, I mean, the Black Sea can be a pretty fierce sea, it's a big inland sea, can go that far and be adequately guided. Maybe it can, but maybe they've got some other way of doing it. Maybe they're using some sort of secret mothership to launch them much closer in. However they're doing it, it's very clever. And I guess we might find out a bit more about that. But they clearly want to worry the Russians because this is making the Russians very nervous. Sevastopol is already not very useful to the Russians because that's vulnerable. And now Novorossiysk, right in their own territory, is vulnerable to these little things as well.
Right, and what else on the front lines of note?
Well, interesting things. I mean, we've been talking about this for a couple of days now. I mean, the Ukrainians are certainly bringing their big units forward, the units that they've wanted to use for the breakthrough. They're having to use now almost in a backup role. And we know they're doing pretty well at Robertine, and we know that the 82nd Air Assault Brigade is now in action, which includes the British Challenger 2 tanks. So that's a matter of some interest to us, along with German and American armoured vehicles. So they're doing quite well there. But at Urazain, about 50 miles further east, we were talking about that yesterday, and what's come to light about Urazain is that the Ukrainians have used their marine brigades. They've used 4 brigades. That's almost a complete division, a marine division, and they've done very well. They've taken Urazain and they're moving south. But usually the military principle is 2 up, 1 back. For every 2 units you deploy, you keep 1 back in reserve. They've deployed all 4 of their marine brigades. Now, that's a pretty big throw of the dice, and they're moving southwards towards Staromilivka, but they're going to come across the Sorovikin line before that. They've got about 5 miles to go, which might take a while, and then they come across the biggest defences that the Russians have laid down, the Sorovikin line. So we'll see how they get on as they get close to it, but they're certainly committing, as it were, all they've got at the moment in terms of their spearhead force. They've got more behind it. This is not all they've got, but this is all they've got with all of their modern equipment, and we'll see how they get on.
And would they have been expected to have been doing better by now?
I think so, yeah. They would have hoped to have broken through further before they committed these high punch. These are brigades that move quickly and punch hard. They would have wanted to use them for an exploitation, not a breakthrough. It doesn't mean to say it's failing, but it does mean it's hard going. Yeah. And as I say, they've got 5 miles ahead of them, and then they come across the really tough defences. And it depends whether the Russians are there or not. I mean, these defences are only useful if the Russians are covering them. But if they're stretched with troops having to go elsewhere, then the defences are just an inconvenience. If they're covered with artillery and troops, then they can be killers.
Yeah. OK, Michael, thanks very much indeed.